I never thought I'd be standing in a lawyer's office at 28 years old, wearing my only decent dress, watching my two older brothers become multimillionaires while I got handed a wrinkled envelope that looked like it had been through a washing machine. But here we are, and let me tell you, life has a twisted sense of humor. My name is Rebecca, and up until 6 months ago, I was living what most people would call an ordinary life. I worked as a junior accountant at a small firm in São Paulo, sharing a tiny apartment with two roommates who never washed their dishes. Every morning, I'd wake up at 6, take the crowded metro to work, spend 8 hours staring at spreadsheets, and come home too tired to do anything except watch reality TV and eat instant noodles. My brothers, Marcus and Daniel, they had it better. Marcus was a successful lawyer, married with 2 kids, living in a penthouse in the fancy part of town. Daniel ran his own tech startup, drove a BMW, and spent his weekends at beach resorts with his influencer girlfriend. Me? I was the family afterthought, the youngest, the girl, the one who didn't quite measure up. Growing up, I was always in their shadow. Marcus was the golden child, the one who got straight A's and made our parents proud at every turn. Daniel was the charming one, the one who could talk his way out of anything and had everyone wrapped around his finger. And then there was me, quiet Rebecca, boring Rebecca. Rebecca who tried so hard to be noticed, but somehow always ended up invisible. Our father, Enrique Silva, was a businessman. Not the flashy kind, but the quiet, calculating type, who built his fortune slowly and carefully over 40 years. He owned a chain of warehouses and logistics companies across Brazil. He wasn't warm or affectionate, at least not with me. With my brothers, he'd talk business, strategy, plans for the future. With me, he'd just nod politely and ask how school was going, even years after I'd graduated. When he died suddenly of a heart attack 3 months ago, I felt this strange mix of grief and relief. Grief because despite everything, he was still my father. Relief because maybe, just maybe, I could stop trying so hard to earn his approval. The funeral was a blur. Hundreds of people I'd never met, all talking about what a great man Henrique Silva was, how he'd built an empire from nothing, how he'd be missed. Marcus gave a beautiful eulogy. Daniel looked appropriately somber in his expensive black suit. I stood in the back crying quietly, wondering if anyone would even notice if I left. 2 weeks after the funeral, we got the call from Eduardo Mendes, my father's lawyer. He wanted to see all 3 of us for the reading of the will. I remember my stomach dropping when I heard that. A will reading, like something out of a movie. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew it wouldn't be good for me. It never was. The day of the meeting, I put on the only professional dress I owned, a navy blue thing I'd bought on sale 2 years ago. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. I looked tired, defeated, like someone who'd spent her whole life waiting for something that was never going to come. Marcus picked me up in his Mercedes. Daniel was already at the lawyer's office when we arrived, checking his phone and looking impatient. The 3 of us sat in Eduardo's conference room, surrounded by dark wood panels and leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Eduardo was an older man, probably in his 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He had this air of formality that made everything feel even more surreal. He cleared his throat, opened a thick folder, and began reading in that monotone voice lawyers seem to perfect. Marcus, my eldest son, receives 60 million Reais and controlling interest in the logistics division. I watched Marcus's face light up. He tried to look somber, respectful, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. 60 million Reais. That's about $12 million. Life-changing money. Never work again money. Daniel, my middle son, receives 60 million Reais and full ownership of the warehouse properties. Daniel actually smiled. He couldn't help it. He was already calculating, I could tell. Probably thinking about selling some of those properties, investing in his tech company, buying that yacht he'd always talked about. Then Eduardo paused. He looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Pity? Sympathy? I braced myself for what was coming. And to my daughter, Rebecca, I leave the contents of this envelope. He slid a beaten-up manila envelope across the table. It was old, yellowed at the edges, with water stains and wrinkled corners. It looked like something you'd find in a trash can, not something you'd inherit from your millionaire father. The silence in that room was deafening. Marcus and Daniel exchanged glances. I could practically hear their thoughts. Poor Rebecca. Even in death, Dad didn't think she was worth anything. I felt this hot flush of shame creep up my neck. My hands were shaking as I reached for the envelope. It was light, almost empty. Whatever was inside wasn't much. Eduardo Mendes said, "That's it?" Daniel was not even trying to hide his surprise. Eduardo cleared his throat again. Eduardo Mendez said, "Those are the terms of the will. There is one additional note." He looked directly at me. Eduardo Mendez said, "Your father left instructions that the envelope should be opened privately, not here." Marcus leaned back in his chair, and I could see him trying not to look relieved. He'd probably been worried he'd have to share some of his inheritance with me, and now he didn't have to. Daniel was already back on his phone, probably texting his girlfriend the good news. We finished up the paperwork quickly after that. Eduardo went over the details of the trust funds, the property transfers, the tax implications. I sat there holding my stupid envelope, feeling like I was going to be sick. When it was finally over, Marcus offered to drive me home. I said no. I couldn't bear to sit in that car with him, listening to him pretend to be sympathetic while secretly celebrating his windfall. I walked instead. It was a long walk, almost 2 hours from the lawyer's office to my apartment, but I needed the time to think, to process, to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life now that my father had made it crystal clear, even from beyond the grave, exactly how little he thought of me. By the time I got home, my feet were killing me and it was dark outside. My roommates weren't there, thank God. I couldn't face anyone right now. I went to my room, closed the door, and finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded several times. My father's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, those sharp, angular letters he used to write in his business ledgers. The letter said, "Rebecca, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know what you must be thinking right now. I know how it must look. Your brothers got millions, and you got an old envelope. You probably think I love them more. You probably think you were never good enough. I need you to know something. You were always the strongest of my children. You just didn't know it yet. Your brothers, they're soft. They've had everything handed to them their whole lives, and they'll burn through that money in a decade because they never learned what it means to struggle. You, Rebecca, you learned to survive on your own. You didn't need my money to make it this far. That's why I'm giving you something different. Inside this envelope is an address. Go there. Talk to the woman who lives there. Her name is Helena Costa. She'll explain everything. Trust me, Rebecca. For once in your life, trust that I knew what I was doing. Your father, Enrique." I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling. An address? That was it? I turned the envelope upside down and a small piece of paper fell out. It had an address in Campinas, a city about 60 miles from São Paulo. No phone number. No other information. Just an address. I didn't sleep that night. I kept reading the letter, trying to find some hidden meaning, some explanation for why my father would do this. The strongest? Me? That was laughable. I'd never felt strong a day in my life. I'd felt overlooked, underestimated, ignored, but never strong. The next morning, I called in sick to work. My boss wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I had to know what this was about. I had to understand why my father thought giving me an address was somehow equivalent to giving my brothers 60 million Reais each. I took a bus to Campinas. It was a cheap intercity bus, the kind where the seats don't recline and someone's always eating something that smells terrible. The ride took about 2 hours. I spent the whole time staring out the window, watching São Paulo give way to smaller towns and green hills, wondering what I was going to find at the end of this journey. The address was in an older neighborhood, the kind with narrow streets and houses that looked like they'd been there for 50 years. I found the house easily enough. It was a modest single-story home with a small garden in front, flowers blooming in neat rows. Someone took care of this place. Someone loved it. I stood at the gate for a solid 5 minutes, trying to work up the courage to knock. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, my dead father sent me here with no explanation?" This felt insane, but I'd come this far. I might as well see it through. I knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. After what felt like forever, the door opened, and I found myself looking at a woman in her early 50s. She had warm brown eyes, gray streaks in her dark hair pulled back in a bun, and a kind smile that made me feel slightly less terrified. Helena Costa said, "You must be Rebecca. I've been expecting you. I'm Helena." She invited me inside. The house was cozy, filled with photos and plants and the smell of fresh coffee. We sat in her living room, and she poured me a cup, adding sugar without asking, somehow knowing exactly how I liked it. Helena Costa said, "Your father told me you'd come eventually. He made me promise not to reach out to you directly. He wanted you to choose to come here on your own." I said, "Who are you?" "How did you know my father?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Helena took a sip of her coffee, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Old pain, maybe. Or old love. Helena Costa said, I met Henrique 35 years ago. We were both young. I was working as a secretary at one of his warehouses. He was already married to your mother, but he was kind to me. We became friends first. Then it became more. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. An affair. My father had an affair. Helena Costa said, it didn't last long. Maybe 6 months. We both knew it was wrong. Henrique loved your mother in his way, and I couldn't live with being the other woman. So we ended it. But not before I got pregnant. The room started spinning. Pregnant. Helena Costa said, I have a daughter. Her name is Patricia. She's 29 years old. She's your half-sister. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. A sister. I had a sister I'd never known about. Helena Costa said, Henrique supported us financially all these years. Quietly. Through a trust he set up. Patricia never knew who her father was. I told her he was someone from my past who couldn't be in our lives. It was easier that way. But Henrique stayed in touch with me. He'd visit a few times a year. He wanted to know about Patricia, how she was growing up. He felt guilty about not being able to acknowledge her. I said, Why are you telling me this? I managed to ask. Helena Costa said, Because he wanted you to know. He wanted you to understand why he left things the way he did. Your brothers, they got money. You got something more valuable. You got the truth, and you got a choice. I said, What choice? Helena stood up and walked to a desk in the corner. She pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Helena Costa said, Inside this folder is everything, the trust documents, the bank accounts Enrique set up for Patricia, the property deeds. He left it all in your name, Rebecca. Not Patricia's. Yours. I opened the folder with shaking hands. There were account statements showing millions of Reais, deeds to properties I'd never heard of, documents spanning 3 decades of my father's secret financial arrangements. Helena Costa said, He could have left this directly to Patricia, but he didn't. He left it to you because he trusted you to do the right thing. He knew your brothers would squander their inheritances. He knew they'd never understand what it means to truly care for someone. But you, Rebecca, he believed you would. I looked up at her, tears streaming down my face. I said, What does he want me to do? Helena Costa said, He wants you to decide. This money, these properties, they're yours legally. You can keep them. You can walk away and never think about Patricia again. Or you can do what your father believed you would do. You can share it with her. You can give her a chance at a better life. You can be the sister she never knew she had. I sat there in stunned silence. My father hadn't overlooked me. He'd given me the hardest task of all. He'd given me a choice that would define who I was as a person. I said, Can I meet her? I whispered. Helena smiled. Helena Costa said, She's actually here. She's been waiting in her room, too nervous to come out. Patricia. A moment later, a young woman appeared in the doorway. She looked so much like me, it was shocking. Same dark hair, same eyes, same small frame. She was wringing her hands nervously, looking at me like I was some kind of judge who would determine her fate. Patricia said, Hi, I'm Patricia. She said it quietly. I stood up, wiping my tears. I said, Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm your sister. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then, without planning it, without thinking, we both stepped forward at the same time and hugged. It was awkward and emotional and perfect. I felt something crack open inside my chest, some wall I'd built around my heart my whole life, and suddenly I was sobbing into this stranger's shoulder, this sister I'd never known I had, and she was crying too. We spent the rest of that day talking. Patricia told me about her life, growing up without a father, wondering who he was, feeling like something was always missing. She'd worked her way through community college, was now working as a nurse at a local hospital, living paycheck to paycheck just like me. She was kind and funny and smart, and I liked her immediately. Not because we were related, but because she was genuinely good. Helena made us dinner that night, and the 3 of us sat around her kitchen table, eating and talking and laughing. It felt like family in a way my actual family never had. There was no competition here, no judgment, just acceptance. Before I left that night, I told Patricia about the inheritance, about the choice our father had left me. She looked terrified. Patricia said, I don't want to cause problems. I don't want you to feel obligated. If you need that money, you should keep it. She said it quickly. I said, but I don't need it, not really. What I needed was sitting right in front of me. A sister, a real connection. something money couldn't buy. I realized this as I spoke. I said, I want to split it, 50-50, everything. The money, the properties, all of it. Helena Costa said, Rebecca, you don't have to do that. She protested. I said, I know, but I want to. Dad was right. I am strong enough to make this choice, and this is the choice I'm making. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, legal filings, and phone calls with Eduardo, who seemed genuinely impressed by my decision. My brothers found out eventually. Marcus was shocked, almost offended that Dad had kept such a huge secret. Daniel was mostly confused about why I'd give away money that was legally mine. I said, they don't get it. I told Patricia during one of our many phone conversations. We talked every day now, catching up on 29 years of missed sisterhood. I said, they think money is the most valuable thing you can inherit. Patricia said, what do you think is? She asked. I said, truth, connection, the chance to be better than you thought you were. Patricia and I decided to do something with our inheritance, something neither of us had ever imagined possible. We started a foundation. We used the properties our father had left us to create affordable housing for single mothers who were struggling, just like Helena had struggled when Patricia was young. We used the money to fund scholarships for nursing students and business programs for women who wanted to start their own companies. It wasn't easy. There were legal hurdles, zoning issues, bureaucratic nightmares that made me want to scream, but Patricia was there through all of it, working just as hard as I was. We learned together, failed together, succeeded together. The first property we renovated was an old apartment building in a neglected part of Campinas. It had been abandoned for years, windows broken, graffiti covering the walls, squatters coming and going. When we first walked through it with the contractor, I wanted to cry. The place smelled like mold and decay. There were holes in the floors, exposed wiring hanging from the ceilings, and I couldn't imagine how we'd ever turn this into something livable. Patricia said, we can do this. We have to do this. Think about all the women who need a safe place to call home. The contractor was a middle-aged man named Rodrigo who'd been in the construction business for 30 years. He looked at us like we were crazy. Rodrigo said, you two ladies realize this is going to cost more than you probably budgeted for, right? This building needs everything. New plumbing, new electrical, structural reinforcement. We're talking months of work. I said, how many months? I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Rodrigo said, 6, maybe 8 if we run into complications, and we always run into complications. Patricia and I looked at each other. 6 to 8 months felt like forever, but we'd come this far. We couldn't back down now. I said, okay, let's do it. Those next 8 months were the hardest of my life. I learned more about construction, permits, building codes, and contractor management than I ever thought possible. Patricia and I were at the site almost every day, watching the transformation happen inch by inch. We made mistakes. We hired the wrong subcontractor for the flooring and had to rip it all out and start over. We underestimated the cost of new windows by almost 50%. We had a pipe burst on the 3rd floor that flooded 2 apartments below. There were nights I'd come home covered in dust, exhausted, wondering if we were in over our heads. I'd call Patricia and she'd be feeling the same way. Patricia said, maybe we should have just donated the money to an existing charity. Maybe we're not cut out for this. She said one particularly bad night after we'd failed our first inspection. I said, no, we're doing this. These women need us. We need us. We can't give up now. And we didn't. We pushed through every setback, every frustration, every moment of doubt. We learned to read blueprints, to negotiate with suppliers, to stand our ground when contractors tried to overcharge us. We discovered strengths we didn't know we had. Helena became our unofficial project manager. She had this way of keeping everyone calm and organized, of solving problems before they became disasters. She'd show up at the site with homemade lunch for the workers, and somehow that simple gesture kept morale high even when things were falling apart. Helena Costa said, you know, watching you two work together like this, it makes me think about what could have been. If Henrique had been able to acknowledge Patricia from the beginning, maybe you would have grown up together. Maybe you would have always had each other. I said, maybe. But I think this way was better. We chose each other. We built this relationship from nothing, just like we're building these apartments. That makes it stronger. When we finally finished that first building, when we walked through the completed apartments with their fresh paint and new appliances and safe, sturdy floors, Patricia and I both cried. It was real. We'd actually done it. We interviewed over 60 families for the 15 available apartments. Each interview broke my heart a little more. Single mothers working 2 or 3 jobs just to afford a dangerous neighborhood. Women escaping abusive relationships with nothing but the clothes on their backs and their children's hands in theirs. Widows trying to support their families on tiny pensions. We chose 15 families based on need and commitment to the program. Part of our foundation's mission was not just to provide housing, but to help women build better futures. Each family had to agree to participate in financial literacy classes, job training programs, and community service. The day we handed over the keys was one of the best days of my life. I watched these women walk into their new homes, saw their faces light up, heard their children laughing and running through the rooms. One woman, a mother of 3 named Sophia, grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go. Sophia said, "You don't understand what this means. For 2 years we've been living in a single room with no kitchen. My kids were sleeping on the floor. I thought we'd never get out. You gave us hope. You gave us a future." I couldn't speak. I just hugged her and let her cry on my shoulder, both of us overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this meant. That night, Patricia, Helena, and I celebrated at Helena's house. We were too tired to go anywhere fancy, so we just ordered pizza and sat in her living room, barely able to believe what we'd accomplished. Helena Costa said, "Your father would be so proud. I know he wasn't always good at showing it, but he believed in you, Rebecca. He believed you had it in you to do something like this." I said, "I wish I'd known that when he was alive. I wish he'd told me." Helena Costa said, "Some things we have to discover on our own. If he'd just told you, you might not have believed him. But now you've proven it to yourself. Nobody can ever take that away from you." She was right. This wasn't about my father's approval anymore. This was about proving something to myself, about becoming the person I was always meant to be. But the work was just beginning. Running the foundation was completely different from my old accounting job. Instead of dealing with numbers and spreadsheets all day, I was dealing with people, with real lives and real problems. Some days were incredible, watching families thrive in their new homes. Other days were heartbreaking. There was a woman named Juliana, who'd been with us for 3 months when her ex-boyfriend found out where she was living. He showed up drunk one night, pounding on her door, screaming threats. We had to call the police, had to help her get a restraining order, had to reassure her that she was safe, that we wouldn't let anything happen to her. Juliana said, "I'm so sorry. I'm causing so much trouble. Maybe I should leave." She was shaking, terrified that we'd kick her out. I said, "You're not going anywhere. This is your home. We're going to protect you. We're going to make sure you're safe." We hired a security guard for the building after that. It wasn't in our original budget, but we made it work, because that's what the foundation was about. It wasn't just about providing 4 walls and a roof. It was about creating true safety, true security, true hope. Patricia threw herself into the medical side of things. She started offering free health screenings at the community center we'd opened next to the apartments. She recruited nurse friends to volunteer their time, brought in doctors to talk about prenatal care and children's health. She saw the whole person, not just their housing situation. Patricia said, "You know what I've realized? Poverty isn't just about money. It's about access. Access to healthcare, to education, to opportunities. We're giving them access. We started adding more programs. Financial literacy classes taught by volunteers from local banks, resume workshops, interview prep, computer skills training. We brought in social workers to help families navigate government assistance programs they didn't know existed. We created a small library where kids could do homework and parents could take English classes. The foundation became a community. Families started helping each other, babysitting each other's kids, sharing meals, forming genuine friendships. It was beautiful to watch, but it was also exhausting. Patricia and I were working 12, 14-hour days. We were always on call, always solving some crisis or another. I remember one particularly rough week when everything seemed to go wrong at once. The plumbing failed in Building 2. A family's apartment was broken into. One of our scholarship recipients dropped out of school because she couldn't afford childcare. Patricia got the flu and couldn't work. I felt like I was drowning, like I couldn't keep all the plates spinning. I called Marcus one night, crying, ready to admit that maybe I couldn't do this after all. Marcus said, "Do you remember when we were kids and Dad took us to see one of his warehouses? You and Daniel were maybe 8 and 10, and I was 12. Dad was showing us around, explaining the business, and you kept asking him questions. Why did he organize things this way? How did he know what customers needed? He was so patient with you, answering everything. Later that night, I heard him tell Mom that you had the best business mind of all of us. He said you saw things the rest of us missed. I said, he never told me that. He never acted like he thought I was smart. Marcus said, I know. I think he was afraid of putting too much pressure on you. But he saw it, Rebecca. He saw who you were going to become. And look at what you're doing now. You're not just running a business. You're changing lives. That's bigger than anything he ever did. That conversation gave me the strength to keep going. The next morning, I got up, made a plan to address each problem one by one, and got back to work. The plumbing got fixed. We installed better locks and a security system. We found a childcare solution for our scholarship student. Patricia recovered. We survived. By the end of the first year, we'd helped 50 families. It sounds like such a small number compared to the millions of people in need, but to those 50 families, it was everything. We started getting attention from local media. Newspapers wanted to interview us. TV stations wanted to feature our story. At first, I was terrified of the publicity. What if people judged us? What if they thought we were doing it for attention? But Patricia convinced me that the exposure could help us raise more money, help more families. Patricia said, "This isn't about us. This is about showing people what's possible. If we inspire even one other person to start something like this, we've multiplied our impact." We did our first TV interview together. I was so nervous I could barely speak, but Patricia was natural, eloquent, passionate. She told our story, told Patricia's story, explained why this work mattered. The response was overwhelming. Donations started pouring in. Volunteers reached out wanting to help. Other cities asked us to advise them on starting similar programs. But with growth came new challenges. We had to hire staff, which meant becoming employers, dealing with HR issues, managing personalities. We had to create systems and processes to ensure quality and consistency. We had to fundraise constantly to keep up with our expanding mission. There was this moment, about 18 months in, when I was sitting in our foundation office late at night, reviewing financial statements, and I realized something profound. I was doing exactly what my father had done, building something from nothing, creating systems, managing people, making tough decisions. But I was doing it for a completely different reason. He'd built wealth. I was building hope. I pulled out his first letter from my wallet and read it again for what must have been the 100th time. "You were always the strongest of my children. You just didn't know it yet." Finally, after all this time, I understood what he meant. Strength wasn't about never struggling. It was about struggling and choosing to keep going anyway. 6 months after that meeting in Eduardo's office, my life looked completely different. I'd quit my accounting job and was working full-time on the foundation. I'd moved out of my cramped apartment and into a small house near Patricia in Campinas. We saw each other almost every day. Helena had become like a second mother to me, filling a void I hadn't even known existed. Marcus and Daniel visited once, early on. They wanted to see what I was doing with the money, probably to judge whether I was wasting it. They walked through our first housing complex, met some of the families we were helping, and I could see them struggling to understand. Daniel said, "You could have been rich, like really rich. Why would you give all this away?" He said it as we were saying goodbye. I looked at Patricia, who was standing next to me, and I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for the money, for her, for this new life I'd stumbled into. I said, "Because I am rich. I just measure it differently than you do," I told him. Marcus was quieter than Daniel during that visit. He walked through the apartment slowly, really looking at everything. He stopped to talk to Sophia and her kids, asked them about school, about their lives. When we were leaving, he pulled me aside. Marcus said, "This is real. What you're doing here is real." He said it with something in his voice I'd never heard before. Regret, maybe. I said, "It could be real for you too. It's not too late to do something meaningful with what Dad left you." Marcus said, "I don't think I know how. I've spent so long chasing money, chasing success, that I forgot why any of it mattered." I said, "Then maybe it's time to remember." He didn't say anything else, just hugged me goodbye. It was the first time my brother had hugged me in years. Daniel, on the other hand, left shaking his head. I watched him get into his BMW, already on his phone, already moving on to the next thing. He didn't get it. Maybe he never would. And that was okay. Not everyone is ready to change, and you can't force them to see what they're not willing to see. Over the next few months, I heard through family friends that Daniel was living large. He'd bought a mansion in Alphaville, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in São Paulo. He was throwing parties every weekend, showing up in gossip columns with different women on his arm. He expanded his tech startup aggressively, hiring dozens of employees, renting expensive office space, spending money like it would never run out. Marcus, from what I heard, was more conservative but still excessive. He'd bought investment properties, started day trading, joined an exclusive country club. His wife wanted to renovate their penthouse, so they spent millions on marble countertops and designer furniture. They took vacations to Europe, to Dubai, to the Maldives. Meanwhile, Patricia and I were living in modest homes, driving old cars, wearing the same clothes we'd worn for years. We poured every available dollar back into the foundation. We could have lived comfortably, could have given ourselves generous salaries, but that wasn't the point. The point was the work, the impact, the lives we were changing. Helena would sometimes worry about us. Helena Costa said, "You're working too hard. You need to take care of yourselves too. Your father left you that money so you could have a good life." I said, "We are having a good life, the best life. We're just defining good differently than most people do." Patricia said, "Besides, we're not suffering. We have enough. We have each other. We have purpose. That's more than most people ever get." And it was true. Despite the long hours and the stress and the constant challenges, I was happier than I'd ever been. I woke up every morning excited about the day ahead. I fell asleep every night knowing I'd made a difference, even if it was small. But I'd be lying if I said it was all beautiful and inspiring. There were dark moments too. Moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. When I'd see a woman we couldn't help because we were at capacity, and I'd lie awake at night thinking about her, wondering if she'd be okay. When funding fell through and we had to cut programs. When families left the foundation and fell back into poverty because the systemic issues were too big for us to solve alone. There was one woman, Carla, who broke my heart. She'd been with us for 6 months, doing so well. She'd gotten a job as a receptionist. Her kids were thriving in school. She seemed happy. Then her mother got sick back in her hometown, 4 hours away. Carla had to choose between keeping her apartment and her job or going to care for her dying mother. Carla said, "I have to go. She's my mom. But I don't know how I'll ever get back on my feet after this. I finally had something stable, and now I'm losing it all." We tried to help. We told her the apartment would be waiting when she came back, even though we had a waiting list of 50 families. We gave her money to help with expenses. But I knew the reality. Once she left, the chances of her coming back were slim. She'd get stuck in her hometown, struggling just like before. I cried after she left. Not because I felt guilty, but because it was a reminder that no matter how much we did, it would never be enough. The problems were too big, too systemic, too deeply rooted. Patricia found me in my office, tears streaming down my face. Patricia said, "You can't save everyone," she said gently. I said, "I know, but I want to. I want to save them all." Patricia said, "Then we'll keep building. We'll keep growing. We'll help as many as we can, and we'll inspire others to do the same. That's all we can do." She was right, but it didn't make it easier. Around the 2-year mark, I started hearing rumors about Daniel. His startup was in trouble. He'd expanded too fast, hired too many people, burned through cash without generating enough revenue. Investors were pulling out, employees were quitting. The tech bubble was bursting and Daniel was caught in the collapse. I reached out to him, but he didn't respond to my calls or texts. He was avoiding the family, avoiding reality. I heard from a mutual friend that he was still living the high life, still partying, still pretending everything was fine even as his company crumbled around him. Marcus, I started seeing more often. He'd been volunteering at the foundation every Saturday for months now, and I could see the change in him. He was softer, more present, more real. He talked about his kids differently now, less about their accomplishments and more about who they were as people. He'd even convinced his wife to volunteer with us, and she surprised me by being genuinely wonderful with the families. Marcus's wife was named Adriana, and one day she pulled me aside. Adriana said, "I need to tell you something. Marcus has been different since he started working here. Better. We were heading for divorce, did you know that? We were living in the same house but barely speaking. Everything was about money and status and keeping up appearances. But something changed when he started coming here. He started asking me about my day, really listening. He started playing with the kids instead of just checking in on their homework. He became the man I married again. I said, 'What do you think changed?' Adriana said, 'He told me about your father's letter, about how Dad knew Marcus would waste the money, that he was testing you because you were the strong one. It destroyed Marcus at first. He felt like a failure, like he'd proven Dad right. But then he realized he could change the story. He could become someone Dad would be proud of, even if Dad wasn't around to see it.' I didn't know what to say. I'd been so focused on my own journey that I hadn't fully seen Marcus's transformation. I said, 'He's doing good work here. The families love him.' Adriana said, Thank you for giving him a second chance. Thank you for showing him there's a different way to live. But not everyone got a second chance. 2.5 years after the will reading, I got a call from Daniel. I almost didn't recognize his voice. He sounded hollow, defeated. Daniel said, "Rebecca, I need help. I lost everything. The company went bankrupt. I had to sell the mansion to pay off debts. My girlfriend left me. I don't know what to do." I said, "Come to Campina's. Come see what we're doing here. Maybe you can figure things out." Daniel said, "I don't want charity." I said, "It's not charity, it's family. Come." He came 3 days later, looking like a different person. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, wore jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual designer clothes. Patricia and I sat with him in our office, and for the first time in our lives, we had a real conversation. Daniel said, "I thought I was so smart. I thought I knew better than Dad, better than everyone. I was going to show the world how to build a successful company. Instead, I proved exactly what Dad said in that letter you told me about. I burned through everything because I never learned what actually matters. I said, so learn now. It's not too late." Daniel said, "I don't even know where to start." Patricia said, "Start by showing up. Start by doing the work. Start by helping people instead of just helping yourself." Daniel started volunteering with us. Unlike Marcus, who'd taken to it naturally, Daniel struggled. He wasn't good with people, didn't know how to talk to the families without sounding condescending, couldn't handle the physical labor. But he kept showing up, and slowly, painfully slowly, he started to change. The hardest part of this whole journey wasn't the legal stuff or the foundation work. It was confronting who I'd been before. That girl who felt invisible, who measured her worth by how much attention her father paid her, who thought she wasn't good enough because she didn't get the same treatment as her brothers. I spent a lot of nights thinking about my father, trying to understand why he did things the way he did, why he couldn't just be open about Patricia, why he felt the need to test me from beyond the grave. I'll never have all the answers, and I've made peace with that. But I think I understand now what he was trying to teach me. Strength isn't about having everything handed to you. It's not about being the favorite or the golden child. Strength is about making hard choices when no one's watching. It's about doing the right thing even when you could get away with doing the easy thing. My father gave Marcus and Daniel money because that's all they would understand. They would take it, spend it, and probably end up right back where they started in a few years. Maybe worse off because they'd lost the motivation to work. But me? He gave me something harder. He gave me a test of character. He gave me a chance to prove that I was the person he always believed I was, even when I didn't believe it myself. About 8 months into running the foundation, we were hosting an opening ceremony for our third housing complex. We'd renovated an old apartment building, turning it into safe, affordable homes for 15 families. Patricia and I had worked on every detail, from picking the paint colors to interviewing the families who would live there. As I stood in front of the crowd, about to give a speech, I looked out at all these faces, single mothers with their kids, women who'd been struggling to survive, just like Patricia's mom, just like me in a different way. And I thought about that beaten-up envelope, that letter from my father, that choice he'd left me with. I never told anyone this, but I keep that envelope in a frame on my desk, not because it's beautiful or valuable, but because it reminds me of the moment my life changed. The moment I stopped waiting for someone else to validate my worth and started creating value in the world on my own terms. My father wrote that I was the strongest of his children. I didn't believe him then. I thought he was delusional or cruel or both, but I understand now. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about deciding to get back up. It's about choosing kindness when you could choose bitterness. It's about building something meaningful instead of just taking what you're given. During my speech that day, I talked about second chances, about how sometimes the things that look like the smallest gifts turn out to be the most valuable, about how family isn't always the people you're born to, but the people who show up when it matters. Patricia was in the front row, tears streaming down her face, giving me a thumbs up. Helena was next to her, beaming with pride. And I realized something profound. I'd spent my whole life feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was missing something, like I was the consolation prize in my family. But I wasn't the consolation prize. I was the whole damn trophy. I just needed to find the right game to play. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She was probably 20, 21, with a baby on her hip and worry in her eyes. Young woman said, "Excuse me, I heard about your program. I'm trying to leave a bad situation. My baby's father, he's not good to us. I've been saving money, but I can't afford a safe place yet. Do you think you could help me?" She said it softly. I looked at this girl, Really looked at her and saw myself. Not the successful foundation director I was now, but the scared, uncertain girl I'd been my whole life until 8 months ago. The girl who didn't think she deserved better. The girl who was waiting for someone to save her instead of saving herself. I took her hand. I said, "Yes, we can help you. But more importantly, you're going to help yourself. We're just going to give you the tools and the space to do it." She started crying right there, thanking me over and over. And I felt it again. That crack in my chest. That wall breaking down. Every time I helped someone, every time Patricia and I made a difference in someone's life, I felt a little more whole. A little more like the person I was always meant to be. That night, Patricia and I went out to celebrate. Not to some fancy restaurant, but to a little corner bar where we'd become regulars. We ordered beer and French fries and talked about our next project. We wanted to start a job training program, something that would help women learn skills they could use to build careers, not just find jobs. Patricia said, "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you'd kept all the money?" she asked me. I thought about it for a moment. I said, "Honestly? Yeah, sometimes. I could be on a beach somewhere, drinking cocktails, never worrying about money again." Patricia said, "Do you regret it?" I looked at my sister, this person who'd been hidden from me my whole life, who'd become my best friend and partner and the family I'd always wanted. I said, "Not for a second. Best decision I ever made." She raised her beer. Patricia said, "To bad decisions that turn out good." I clinked my bottle against hers. I said, "To envelopes full of surprises." We laughed, and it was the kind of real, genuine laughter I'd never had with Marcus or Daniel. The kind that comes from understanding each other, from having been through something together, from choosing each other every single day. A year after that meeting in Eduardo's office, I got a call from Marcus. He wanted to meet for coffee. I was surprised, but I agreed. We met at a cafe near my old apartment, and I barely recognized him. He looked tired, stressed, older than he should have looked. Marcus said, "Things haven't been going well. I invested a lot of the inheritance in a business deal that fell through, lost about 20 million Reais. My wife is furious. She wants a divorce." He admitted it. I said, "I'm sorry," and I meant it. Despite everything, he was still my brother. Marcus said, "Daniel's not doing much better. He expanded his startup too fast, hired too many people, spent too much money. He's probably going to have to declare bankruptcy soon." He continued. I didn't know what to say. There was no satisfaction in hearing this, no sense of vindication, just sadness. Sadness that our father had been right about them. Sadness that they'd had everything and still managed to lose it. Marcus said, "I heard what you've been doing. The foundation, the housing, all of it. Dad would have been proud." He said it looking down at his coffee. I said, "I think he already was. That's why he left me what he did." I said it quietly. Marcus said, "I don't understand it, any of it. Why he gave you an envelope. Why he had this whole secret family. Why he thought testing you was more important than just giving you money like he gave us." He admitted. I said, "I think he knew we'd all end up exactly where we are now. You and Daniel with money you didn't know how to value. Me with something I had to work for, something that actually mattered." Marcus looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Respect, maybe, or envy. Marcus said, "Do you think you could use another volunteer at your foundation?" "I need to do something meaningful. I need to figure out who I am without the money," he asked. I smiled. I said, "Yeah, I think we could use your help. But you should know, we don't pay much, and the work is hard." Marcus said, "Good. I need hard right now. Easy hasn't worked out so well for me." Marcus started volunteering with us 2 weeks later. He was terrible at first, too used to delegating, too uncomfortable getting his hands dirty, but he kept showing up, and slowly, gradually, he started to change. He started to understand what our father had been trying to teach us all along. Patricia and I celebrated our 2nd anniversary of the foundation with a big event. We'd helped over 200 families by that point, awarded 40 scholarships, started 3 job training programs. It wasn't just a foundation anymore. It was a movement. During my speech that night, I finally told the whole story. About the envelope, about the choice, about finding Patricia. People were crying by the end of it, not because it was sad, but because it was real. Because it was proof that sometimes the things that seem like the worst moments of our lives are actually the beginning of something better. Afterward, an elderly man approached me. He introduced himself as Carlos, one of my father's old business partners. Carlos said, "Your father talked about you all the time. He worried about you constantly. He knew how hard it was for you, being the only daughter, feeling overlooked. He wanted to protect you from becoming like your brothers, entitled, soft. He wanted you to understand that the real inheritance wasn't money, it was character. I felt tears pricking my eyes. I said, "Did he ever say that to you directly?" Carlos nodded. Carlos said, "Once. About a year before he died. He told me he was giving his sons money because they'd never learned to live without it, but he was giving you a chance to discover who you really were. He said you were the only one of his children who had the strength to handle the truth." I looked around the room at everything Patricia and I had built, at the families we'd helped, the lives we'd changed, the community we'd created, and I finally, fully understood what my father had been trying to give me. He hadn't left me out of the will. He'd left me the only thing that actually mattered. He'd left me a choice. And in making that choice, I'd found myself. 2 years in, the foundation was thriving beyond anything Patricia or I had imagined. We'd expanded to 3 cities, helped over 500 families, and started attracting attention from major donors who wanted to support our work. We'd been featured in newspapers, invited to speak at conferences, recognized by the mayor for our contributions to the community. But the best part wasn't the recognition or the success. It was the morning coffee with Patricia before we started work. It was Helena calling just to check in and tell us she loved us. It was seeing Marcus slowly transform from an entitled businessman into someone who actually cared about making a difference. It was the thank you notes from women whose lives we'd changed, from kids who now had safe homes, from families who finally had hope. I kept my father's letter in my wallet, folded and refolded so many times the creases were wearing thin. Every now and then, when things got hard, when I felt overwhelmed or doubted myself, I'd take it out and read it again. "You were always the strongest of my children. You just didn't know it yet." He was right. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. And that knowledge, that certainty about who I am and what I'm capable of, that's worth more than 60 million Reais. That's worth more than any inheritance money could buy. Sometimes I drive past Marcus's old penthouse, Daniel's fancy apartment building. I wonder if they understand yet what they lost when they chose money over meaning. Marcus is starting to get it. Daniel, I'm not sure about. He hasn't reached out, hasn't acknowledged what happened. Maybe he never will. But that's okay. Their journey is theirs to take. Mine has already begun, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 3 years after that meeting in Eduardo's office, Patricia and I were sitting in our foundation office late one evening, reviewing applications for our newest program. We'd just hired 10 new staff members, opened a community center, and secured funding for the next 5 years. Patricia said, "Do you ever think about what Dad would say if he could see all this?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. I said, "Yeah, I think he'd probably just nod and say he knew I could do it." Patricia laughed. Patricia said, "Sounds about right." Not much for compliments, was he? I said, "No. But I think leaving me that envelope was his way of giving me the biggest compliment he could. He trusted me with the truth. He trusted me to make the right choice. He trusted me to be better than I thought I was." I agreed. Patricia said, "And you were. You are." She said it while reaching over to squeeze my hand. I said, "We are. This isn't just me. This is us. This is what we built together," I corrected her. She smiled, and I saw tears in her eyes. Patricia said, "You know, for 29 years I felt like something was missing. Like I had this hole in my life where a family should be. And then you showed up with your beaten-up envelope and your decision to share everything, and suddenly I understood what I'd been missing. A sister. A real sister." I felt my own eyes getting wet. I said, "Same. I spent my whole life feeling invisible to my family. And then I found you. And suddenly I was seen. Really seen." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, just being together, understanding that this moment, this connection, this was what my father had really left me. Not money, not property, but the opportunity to find the family I was always meant to have. The foundation had become something bigger than either of us had imagined. We now had 4 housing complexes across 3 cities. We'd helped over 500 families. Our scholarship program had funded 80 students through nursing school and business programs. We'd created 3 community centers offering everything from childcare to job training to health services. We employed 32 people, all of whom believed in our mission as deeply as we did. But more than the numbers, it was the stories that kept us going. Like Amanda, who came to us fleeing an abusive marriage with her 2 daughters. She was so broken when she arrived, barely able to make eye contact, jumping at every loud noise. We gave her a safe apartment, connected her with a therapist, helped her get a restraining order against her ex-husband, enrolled her in our job training program. 2 years later, Amanda was working as an office manager, had saved enough money to buy a used car, and was taking college classes at night. Her daughters were thriving in school. She'd even started dating again, someone kind who treated her well. She came to our anniversary celebration and shared her story with the crowd. Amanda said, "I was dead inside when I came here. I didn't believe I deserved anything good. I thought my life was over at 32. But Rebecca and Patricia, they didn't just give me a place to live. They gave me my life back. They showed me I was worth saving." She was crying as she spoke, and so was I. That's what this work was about, not just housing or money or programs. It was about helping people remember their own worth, their own strength, their own power to change their stories. My phone rang. It was Eduardo, calling me at almost 9 at night. Eduardo Mendez said, "Rebecca, I wanted to let you know something. Your father left specific instructions that 3 years after his death, I was to give you a second letter. It's been exactly 3 years today." He said when I answered. I felt my heart skip. "Another letter?" Eduardo Mendez said, "He wanted to see what you'd do with the first one before you got the second. Can you come by my office tomorrow?" He explained. I said, "I'll be there. I promised." That night, I barely slept. What could my father possibly have left unsaid? What more could there be? Patricia offered to come with me to Eduardo's office, and I was grateful. I didn't want to face whatever this was alone. The next morning, we sat in that same conference room where this whole journey had begun. Eduardo looked older, more tired than I remembered. He handed me another envelope, this one pristine and sealed with wax, my name written in my father's careful handwriting. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The letter began, "Rebecca, if you're reading this, 3 years have passed since you first learned about Patricia. Eduardo has been instructed to tell me, through reports he collected, what you decided to do. By now, I hope you understand why I did things the way I did. Your brothers needed to learn that money without purpose is meaningless. You needed to learn that you were stronger than you ever believed. Patricia needed to know she had a sister who would choose her, not because of obligation, but because of love. I watched you your whole life, Rebecca. I saw how hard you tried to earn my approval, how much it hurt you to feel overlooked. I want you to know that I was never disappointed in you. I was preparing you. Life isn't about being handed everything you want. It's about fighting for what matters and discovering who you are in the process. You are my legacy, not the businesses I built or the money I made. You, your kindness, your strength, your capacity to choose what's right over what's easy. I love you. I always have. I just needed you to learn to love yourself first. I'm proud of you, Rebecca. I always was, always will be, your father." I couldn't see the words anymore through my tears. Patricia was crying too, reading over my shoulder. Eduardo quietly left the room to give us privacy. I said, "He was proud of me." He said it. "He was actually proud of me," I whispered. Patricia hugged me tight. Patricia said, "Of course he was. Look at what you've done. Look at who you are." We sat there for a long time, crying and holding each other. All those years of feeling not good enough, of believing I was the disappointing daughter, the afterthought, the one who didn't matter. And all along, my father had seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He'd believed in me so much that he'd been willing to risk everything on a test, on a choice, on the hope that I would prove him right. And I had. Not because I was trying to please him or earn his approval, but because I'd finally learned to trust myself, to believe in my own capacity for goodness, to understand that my worth wasn't determined by how much money I had or how successful I appeared to be. When we finally left Eduardo's office, the sun was shining brightly, and the city seemed more beautiful than I remembered. We walked to a nearby cafe and sat outside, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Patricia said, "What are you going to do with the letter?" I said, "Frame it probably. Put it next to the first one. They're the two most valuable things I own." Patricia said, "More valuable than the foundation?" I said, "The foundation is a result of those letters. It exists because Dad gave me a choice and I made the right one. But those letters, they're proof that he loved me, that he always loved me. And for someone who spent her whole life doubting that, that proof is priceless." We sat there crying together, mourning the father I'd never fully known, celebrating the journey he'd set me on, grateful for the sister he'd helped me find. It was messy and beautiful and perfectly imperfect, just like life. When we finally left Eduardo's office, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there, and it had finally lifted. My father had been proud of me. He'd loved me. He'd believed in me. And I'd proven him right. That evening, Patricia, Helena, Marcus, and I had dinner together at Helena's house. We'd started having weekly family dinners, a tradition that meant more to me than any inheritance ever could. Marcus was talking about a family he'd helped that week, his eyes bright with genuine enthusiasm. Helena was fussing over everyone, making sure we had enough food. Patricia was laughing at one of my stories. This was my inheritance. This room full of people who chose to be here, who chose to be family. This feeling of belonging, of purpose, of being exactly who I was meant to be. Daniel had started joining us too, though he was quieter, more reserved. He was still finding his way, still figuring out who he wanted to be now that he'd lost everything he thought defined him. But he was trying, and that mattered. One night after dinner, Daniel pulled me aside. Daniel said, "I need to tell you something. I've been jealous of you for 3 years now. When Dad died and you got that envelope, I thought it was hilarious. Poor Rebecca, getting nothing while Marcus and I became rich. But you were the one who got everything that mattered. You got the truth. You got a purpose. You got a real family. And I got money that I wasted trying to fill a hole that money could never fill." I said, "It's not too late, Daniel. You're here now. You're doing the work. That counts for something." Daniel said, "I lost 60 million Reais in less than 3 years. How do you come back from that? How do you forgive yourself for being that stupid?" I said, "The same way I forgave myself for spending 28 years thinking I wasn't good enough. You just decide to be different. You just choose to learn from it instead of being destroyed by it. Dad gave us all exactly what we needed to become who we were supposed to be. Marcus and I are figuring it out. You will too." And slowly, he did. Daniel threw himself into the foundation work with an intensity I'd never seen from him. He used his tech skills to build us a better database system for tracking families and outcomes. He created a website that helped us attract more donors. He started teaching computer skills classes to the women in our programs, and he was surprisingly patient and good at it. 6 months later, Daniel launched his own coding program for kids from low-income families. He started with 10 students, all teenagers from our housing complexes and the surrounding community. Within a year, 3 of his students had gotten internships at tech companies. 2 had received full scholarships to study computer science in college. Marcus underwent a similar transformation. He sold the penthouse and bought a normal house in a normal neighborhood. He left his high-powered law firm and took a position at a non-profit legal aid organization, helping low-income families with housing issues and custody battles. His wife Adriana started a support group for the women in our housing program, teaching them about their legal rights. His kids started volunteering at the foundation too, growing into thoughtful, compassionate young people who understood that privilege came with responsibility. One day, Marcus and I were painting a classroom in our newest community center. Marcus said, "Do you remember when we were kids and Dad would bring us to his warehouses? You and I would play hide and seek while Daniel followed Dad around asking business questions." I said, "I remember. You always let me win." Marcus said, "I did. I remember asking Dad once why he smiled when he looked at you, but not when he looked at Daniel and me. You know what he said? He said you had joy. That Daniel and I were already calculating, already thinking about angles and advantages, but you just had pure joy. He said he hoped you'd never lose that. That's why he tested you the way he did. He wanted to make sure the world didn't steal your joy." I stopped painting, tears running down my face. I said, "I didn't feel joyful growing up. I felt invisible." Marcus said, "Because we made you feel that way. But Dad saw you. He always saw you. And in the end, he made sure you'd see yourself too." The foundation continued to grow. By year 4, we were operating in 5 cities, had helped over 1,000 families, and had a staff of 50 people. We'd created a model that other organizations were starting to replicate. But with success came challenges. We had to balance growth with quality, expansion with sustainability. Patricia and I found ourselves spending more time in meetings and less time with the families. We implemented a rule that no matter how busy we got, both Patricia and I had to spend at least 1 day a week directly with families. Those days became sacred to me. I'd visit the housing complexes, sit in women's kitchens drinking coffee, play with their kids, listen to their stories. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. I ran into Sophia, the woman who'd grabbed my hand on move-in day 4 years earlier. She was different now, confident, put together, smiling. Sophia said, "I need to tell you something. I'm moving out next month." My heart sank. I said, "What happened? Are you okay?" Sophia laughed. Sophia said, "I'm more than okay. I saved enough for a down payment on a small house. I'm ready to stand on my own. And I'm only able to do this because you gave me the foundation to build on. Now I get to pass this opportunity to someone else who needs it. I started crying right there in the hallway. This was what success looked like. Not dependence, but strength. Not staying forever, but growing and moving on. After Sophia moved out, we chose a young mother named Renata who was fleeing domestic violence with her infant daughter. The cycle continued, one woman rising, making space for another. 5 years after my father's death, we hosted a massive celebration for our 10th housing complex. Over 300 people showed up. Current families, families who'd moved on, staff members, volunteers, donors, community partners. Patricia and I stood together watching it all, overwhelmed by what we'd built. Helena came up behind us and put her arms around both of us. Helena Costa said, "Henrique would be so proud. You took his test and you didn't just pass it. You exceeded every expectation." During the celebration, woman after woman stood up and shared their stories. They talked about escape and survival and healing and growth. They talked about hope. Then Marcus stood up. Marcus said, 5 years ago, my father left me 60 million Reais. He left Daniel the same. And he left Rebecca an old envelope. At the time, I thought he'd been unfair, cruel even. But my father knew something I didn't. He knew that what he gave me would make me weaker, and what he gave Rebecca would make her stronger. I burned through most of my inheritance in 3 years. But Rebecca? She took her envelope and built all of this. She found her sister Patricia. She created a foundation that has changed 1,000 lives. She showed me what real wealth looks like. It's not money in the bank. It's people in community. It's purpose and meaning and love. So thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for showing me a better way to live. The room erupted in applause. I was crying too hard to speak. Patricia squeezed my hand, and I looked around at all these faces, all these lives, all this love. My brothers got 60 million Reais each. I got a beaten-up old envelope. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Because that envelope didn't just contain a letter and an address. It contained a test, a choice, and ultimately, a gift. The gift of discovering that I was stronger than I ever imagined. The gift of finding a sister I never knew I had. The gift of building something meaningful instead of just inheriting something valuable. Money runs out. Property can be sold. Businesses can fail. But character, purpose, connection, those things last forever. Those things compound and grow and create ripples that extend far beyond yourself. 4 years after my father's death, the foundation had helped over 1,000 families, awarded 200 scholarships, and created 5 community centers across Brazil. Patricia and I had been invited to speak at conferences internationally. We'd written a book about our journey. We'd inspired other people to start similar programs in their communities. But more than any of that external success, I'd found something I'd been searching for my entire life. I'd found myself. I'd found my purpose. I'd found my family. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not taking the easy path, not keeping all that money for myself, not choosing comfort over challenge, and I tell them the same thing every time. The easy path would have destroyed me. It would have confirmed every negative thought I'd ever had about myself. It would have made me dependent, entitled, lost. The hard path, the path my father set me on with that beaten-up envelope, that path saved me. It challenged me. It pushed me to become someone I never thought I could be. It gave me a chance to prove, not to my father or my brothers or anyone else, but to myself, that I was enough, that I was strong, that I was worthy, and that knowledge, that certainty, that's the real inheritance. That's what my father really left me. Not money or property or business, but the opportunity to discover who I really was and what I was truly capable of. My name is Rebecca Silva, and I'm not the overlooked daughter anymore. I'm not the invisible one. I'm not the afterthought. I'm a founder, a sister, a change maker, and most importantly, I'm someone who knows her own worth. And no amount of money could ever be more valuable than that. The beaten-up envelope sits framed on my desk, a reminder of where I came from and who I've become. Sometimes visitors ask about it, confused why I'd frame something so ordinary-looking. And I smile and tell them it's the most valuable thing I've ever owned. Not because of what was in it, but because of what it led me to discover. It led me to Patricia, to Helena, to meaningful work, and most importantly, to myself. That's the thing about inheritances. The most valuable ones aren't the ones that give you everything. They're the ones that give you the chance to discover what you're made of, to prove who you are, to choose what kind of person you want to be. My father knew that. He knew that what I needed wasn't money. What I needed was a reason to believe in myself. And in the end, that beaten-up old envelope, that impossible choice, that unexpected sister, they gave me exactly that. They gave me a life worth living, a purpose worth fighting for, and a family worth cherishing. They gave me everything that really matters. So when people say my brothers got 60 million Reais each and I just got an envelope, I smile. Because they're right. My brothers got money. I got a life. And I know which one I'd choose every single time.